Yeah, I would. Chris mentioned that he's working with Malawians who are focused on conservation agriculture versus regenerative agriculture. To be honest, I don't really know what the definition difference is between the two, and no one really knows what the definition of regenerative agriculture is either. It's nature is this infinitely complex thing, and on every piece of land, regenerative means something completely different. If you just follow a playbook for how to be regenerative on a piece of land, you're going to fail. You have to understand how your land functions and then be regenerative in that sense. And so, I mean, the words regenerative and conservation, to conserve means to basically keep something the way that it is, I think. To regenerate is to fix, to restore, to reestablish. And I would suggest that almost every piece of land in our country is in need of both. Because in the last 12,000 years, basically the way that we've been living, the mindset that we have had has been to conquer the world and basically mine resources in the development of growing food. And so I think that all land needs to be regenerated in one way or another. But I wouldn't get too worried about the definition of conservation or regeneration. I think ultimately the purpose probably is about the same. Yeah. Y'all might completely disagree with me on that. Yeah.
Is there any activity in Austin to increase diversity in regenerative agriculture?
I do not know.
Diversity?
Yeah, in Austin, Texas?
Yes.
I don't know.
Like the capital, like state politics?
Texas.
Oh, and public policy.
In legislature.
Yeah, no. Well, and I shouldn't say that because Judith McCreary and FARFA are actually doing really, really good work in advocating for regenerative food systems. But the stuff that I was talking about with understanding that this is water, understanding the water that we swim in, our cultural mindset, politicians in the State House and in DC, that's not something that they're concerned about. I really think that this is something, if a regenerative movement is going to flourish and grow, it's going to be a consumer-driven movement. We have to use our greatest power that we have, which is our ability to spend money differently. And if we did that in very small ways, if more people did that in very small ways, things would change, and then politicians would begin to notice, and then public policy would begin to change. But imagine for a second going to a national scale that politicians are going to say, let's change the way that we grow food. And the first, at this point, Republican caucus is in Iowa, like the Corn Belt. No one's going to do that. What politician is going to say, let's temporarily raise prices on food? That's a great idea. That's going to get me elected. Yeah, right. Yeah, it's just, either politicians believe industrial agriculture, they're bought out by industrial agriculture, which has more lobbyists than the defense industry, by the way. Or there's a third point, which I can't remember right now. But yeah, it's just not, it's going to be, in my mind, a consumer-driven movement. We have to spend money differently and then grow the movement that way. And that doesn't mean changing your life entirely. That doesn't mean you have to be perfect. That means one day a week, one day a month, spending money, eating food that is grown regeneratively. That would make a huge difference.
Susie, do you have?
Yeah, there was, I can't remember the details, but there was a bill that got passed. It wasn't this last legislative
Will you hand me my water, please? Thanks.
They all kind of run together recently. That directed the state soil and water conservation districts to work on things from a soil health perspective. But that's as far as it got. It was a move in the right direction. It was what could be done at the time. So there are attempts. Anytime there can be attempts. There are attempts to move things to recognition that caring for the soil improves habitats in various ways. So that's where we are in the policy process.
The increase in organic composition of the soil is something that can be measured. It can be improved because it can be measured. We can only improve what we can measure.
Well, that's actually not true, but we can improve all kinds of things we can't measure, but we just don't know how to prove them to legislators, right? nature doesn't care if we can measure it or not.
Well, yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, but in order to influence public policy, that's the best way to do it. You're right. Yeah,
Policy has to
yeah,
measure.
yeah. Politics is a whole nother talk. Yeah. And I just, I'm not alone in this room when I believe in public policy. I truly do. But I don't have a whole lot of hope in that being the driver of a regenerative food system. And I don't really think that we should rely on that. I mean, as a progressive person myself, so many, I put this in the first op-ed that I wrote in the Dallas Morning News, many of my progressive friends really care about climate change. But, when it comes to actually changing their way of life, there's not a whole lot that's going on, because we rely on the government to do those things. This movement is really, I think, going to be a consumer-driven movement, at least the beginning of it. And then public policy, hopefully, will have a big role to play in that moving forward. Like I said, we could incentivize farmers. If we want to change the way we grow food, we could incentivize farmers with billions of dollars to plant cover crops and to practice regenerative food systems. But we choose to not do that because politicians don't value that. And also people that vote for them, it's just look on any politician's website, it's nowhere on there. It's just not on the radar. So in order for it to be on the radar, I think the first consumers have to
But
care.
also carbon sequestering
Yeah.
opens a lot of new doors.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you. I mean, there are all these amazing things out here called plants and trees that we learned about in like 5th grade through photosynthesis that magically take carbon out of the air, put it into the ground, and give us oxygen. But we're spending billions of dollars to create carbon capture technology. Nature provided this for us, and we have 895 million acres of farmland that we could be doing that on while still producing food, while then also protecting our water resources, while protecting our soil, while having rural communities earn more money, and fighting climate change at the same time. But we're not doing it. So how do we begin to do that? I think it's about spending money differently.
Thomas,
So.
can I bring up one policy issue that just occurred to me?
Yeah.
That I think is pertinent right now. So, there was a move recently by USDA to put a lot of money into climate smart agriculture, which is a way around talking directly about regenerative agriculture so as to not upset certain people. But it is focused on, and it can look a lot of different ways, it's focused on figuring out how to capture more carbon in the soil. That funding is at threat because there are other folks who want to move that money to industrial farm subsidies in the Farm Bill. So that is actually federal legislation that's important right now that we could be talking to our representatives about. So I'm sorry, I don't have go here, do this, do that right off the top of my head, but that is kind of pertinent right now to know that that's happening.
I looked at you this whole speech, by the way. You were the guy that I looked at, so you might have felt awkward that I kept looking at you. But
It's just a thought in my head, you keep going back to the educating and other things, and you said how hard it is for industrial farmers to try to transition into this, and I imagine that's going to be an insurmountable task for a lot of people. And I would love to get policy to get this done, but I also don't want to coerce any industrial farmer into basically failure, and then their family can't farm on it either. I want real good action and involvement to help take away people from the industrial, their whole family's done it for generations, and kind of get even their kids maybe in young programs to show them that, your family's done it like this for so long, and you can make such a big difference by doing it this way instead. And I don't know, as much as I'd love to move the ball forward, I feel like we always leave people behind when we make huge policy changes in Washington. We step over so many people.
Yeah.
And we really would be putting generations of farmers out of business because they might not be able to handle the transition.
well, if we pay them, what I'm suggesting, and this is all a big hypothetical. I mean, it's kind of like Disneyland, really. What I'm suggesting is that we pay farmers to implement these practices. So we give them money. And the truth is, and I know that like we're so far removed from anything that is anywhere resembling regenerative on a big scale that people don't trust that. And in fact, I was at a grazing workshop in 2012 in North Carolina where this farmer said, you know, farmers would rather fail together than succeed alone, right? And I was like, that's not true. Farmers are these individual people, like, you know, but it is true. Industrial farmers would absolutely rather, most of them, not all, would rather fail together than succeed alone because they're worried, because they've been beaten down for generations. You know, the Green Revolution was a perfect example of that. There was all these promises of wealth with these chemicals and these abundance of, you know, bushels, et cetera. They didn't make any more money. Cargill made money. Cargill has 14 billionaires in their family. Farmers continue to not make money, and they were asked to desecrate the biggest resource that they have, which is their land, so that other people could make money, so that we can eat cheap food, so that we could redefine what abundance meant for us, which is really, well, it's excessive. And so, I mean, when you really truly believe in the laws of nature, if we begin to adopt regenerative practices, these farmers won't fail. I think that they'll save their land, and that they'll make more money, and then actually their, you know, following generations might actually want to farm, which is not the case right now.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Yep.
You talked about your property that you own yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Came from your wife's grandfather and it had been decimated for
It's-
practices for a year.
Yeah, it's in my family,
It's in your family, okay.
not
And married
Jillian's.
in? Oh, okay. Married in. Okay, I'm sorry. I was
That's okay,
a little
yeah.
confused on the big story. But what are some specific examples you can tell us about what you're doing in your little corner of the world to make a difference? I mean, you mentioned some statistical improvements.
Yeah.
But what'd you do to get there?
Great question. What did I do to get there? I mean, my journey to understanding that regenerative agriculture was something that I wanted to do was not a straightforward path. But, you know, it goes back to the understanding that this is water metaphor, you know, and that really happened for me in college. I read the book Ishmael by Daniel Quinn. It changed my life. It changed my trajectory in life. I began to understand that the cultural story that I grew up thinking was just the truth of the world was a story. It wasn't real. It was a story that we chose to implement a long time ago. And I understood the civilized mythology that we believed in, that as a child, like there's a drumbeat of civilized mythology, and as children, I think that we all hear it. And then we learn to ignore it. And I began to hear that again. And I started thinking about the way that we grow food and the way that we're in relationship with nature. And I've always been someone who's wanted to do something great. I mean, in college, I was the biggest idealist in the world, you know, and I had no idea how to express that in a productive way. And when I realized that I could come back to Texas, take this 160 acres of land that, you know, I spent summers burning bonfires and shooting fireworks on, and regenerate that land and rebuild an ecosystem, and restore this native grassland that my family, well-intentioned but misguidedly, destroyed in 1845 and for the next 100 years. That was, in my mind, the greatest way that I could make a difference in this world. And it remains that. And to Mother Culture, that is not some way that we can make a difference. You know, to be a farmer, I can't remember like how many people I said, I'm going to be a farmer, and they looked at me like, are you crazy? You know, is that something that you're actually going to do? And I was just convinced that it was what I needed to do to make a difference in this world. And I still feel that way. And the nuts and bolts of it are, you just look to nature, you observe how nature has functioned for millions and millions of years, and you attempt humbly to replicate that. You know, there are no monocultures in nature. There is no part of nature that naturally tills itself, you know? The soil that was on our farm had been there for millions of years. It had never been tilled until my family got there. And I think about it sometimes, like what my great-great-great-grandfather Jacob Ramsey must have felt when he first put that plow into the land and saw what that soil looked like. They came from Danville, Virginia, because assumingly their land was void of fertility. And so they traveled across 15 different rivers to get to Texas. And when he put that plow into the land, that soil must have been black and like chocolate cake, and it must have felt like a cushion to walk on. And the earthworms coming out of that soil must have just been everywhere. And he must have had so much hope tilling into that soil. That was a resource that took millions of years to develop. And in 100 years, by practicing that style of agriculture, it was gone. And that's not unique to my family. That is happening today. It has been happening across our country since settlers began moving west across the plains, destroying tribal populations, decimating ecological diversity, and plowing land. And that's not to make anyone feel shameful, but it's just the way that we did it, and there's a different way to grow food. And it's just by honoring the cycles of nature, the carbon cycle, the water cycle, all of those things that I could talk about for a long time, and I won't, but thanks for the question. Mm-hmm.
Thomas, can you describe to us, many of us obviously live in a subdivision, in a community, happening a lot, but describe to me your farm. You hinted to me that you've taken some of that, restored it to native Blackland Prairie, so you're probably not, I don't know if you're grazing on that land, or if you're rotating different types of animals on that land. Can you describe?
Sure, yeah. So our land is actually just south of what is now Boardwalk Lake. It used to be Boardwalk Creek. The Blackland line, if you look at a map of soil, the Blackland runs directly through our land. So on the south is Blackland, on the north is Post Oak Savanna, or cross timbers.
Picture of your farm?
Yeah, so that's our farm right there. That's part of it. That's actually looking from our house down to a pond. And that's on the Post Oak Savanna side. And so what that land probably looked like in 1845 was mature oak trees and, waving grasses that were this tall. So what we do, the land, the soil that we have today still is degraded and desecrated. I mean, it's basically compacted subsoil. We're building topsoil slowly. But I raise grass-fed beef today. And so we move the cows around the farm in adaptive multi-paddock grazing systems, or mob grazing, or there's lots of other words for it. And we keep them tightly bunched using polywire, and then we move them every day to a new section, and then we let that land fully rest and recover. And what that land looks like when the grasses are fully grown is basically like something has destroyed that land, which is exactly what you want it to look like. Because what the cattle are doing are pushing that organic matter into the soil, which feeds the soil life. It covers the soil, which protects it from the sun. It holds water, and then allows those grass plants to grow back better the next season, or the next, in 2 months from then. And so we move our cows around the land. It's always changing because nature is always changing. It's a moving target, so it's not like you have to just follow this one playbook. And then, of course, I'm also seeding diverse grasses all the time. I'm trying to increase diversity all the time. So my grandfather planted a whole bunch of Bermuda, and he sprayed it with ammonium nitrate. The worst piece of land on our farm is this old hay meadow, which he just sprayed and sprayed and sprayed and seeded with Bermuda over and over. And if it gets above 90 degrees and doesn't rain for a week, that thing is dead. And so every year for the last 4 years, I've seeded that with spring and summer grasses, at least 8 different varieties, to try to regenerate that diversity out there. And it's working.
Can you tell me what kind of varieties are native to Texas, like grasses, right?
Yeah, there's, you named them. I don't know what this, it's Indian grass, buffalo grass, switchgrass, big blue stem, little blue stem. Those are all summer grasses.
And you're not tilling
No.
to put that seed in, so you're just
Using a no-till system, which, yeah, it's a no-till drill. You pull it behind your tractor, and it's got this tiny little thing that kind of cuts just this far into the ground. A seed drops into it and covers it up, and it works. So we just have to remember that the things that we walk on, that stuff out there that we walk on, is a world in and of itself. It's living. It's a living ecosystem. And we don't think of it, we just think of it as dirt. But regenerative farmers and ranchers really manage their underground herd as much as they manage their above ground herd. And that is a concept that is completely foreign to our industrial system, our industrial mindset. It's all about just focusing what's above ground and trying to get as many bushels per acre or whatnot. And so it's a mindset. Yep.
Is this a unique American problem, or is this
No,
worldwide?
it's a worldwide problem.
Is there doing a good job?
I am not an expert on that, so I don't know exactly. But the way that we grow food, it's not unique to the United States. But the marketing, this is kind of an interesting side point, like the marketing aspect of industrial agriculture in the United States is that we're feeding the world. And we're not. We're not. We could, but we're not. I mean, we're not even feeding our communities. My community of Honey Grove during COVID had about a 35% reliance on the food bank. I mean, it's an entirely, it's a food desert. And it's literally surrounded by industrial farms. There are billions of people that are starving. That's a marketing gimmick. The Feed the World thing is a marketing gimmick. And people also say that regenerative agriculture can't feed the world. It can. It depends on how much we eat. Like, we can't eat 263 pounds of meat a year, you know, for everybody to enjoy this. We have to eat less meat, but that doesn't mean that we can't eat meat. It doesn't mean that we can't grow things regeneratively. We just have to redefine what abundance means to us. And to me, you know, to folks who don't understand that this is water or that the problems that exist with the way that we're living, well, why would we do that, you know? But in my view, if we continue to live this way, I mean, I feel like I should put tinfoil on my head, but like, we're not going to continue to be able to do this. We've lost a third of our topsoil since 1970. If we, you know, and we're increasing the amount of tillage that we're, you know, across the world. So we're continuing to lose topsoil. If we continue this, it's just not hard to see where that's going. And where it is going is lab meat, artificial intelligence. We're moving ourselves further and further from the laws of nature because that's what we rely on. It is insane for us to think, well, maybe we're living our lives wrong. Maybe we should change. Maybe we're part of nature. You know, maybe we should actually abide by the same laws that every other creature has abided by forever and that our own species abided by for 96% of our existence on this planet, you know? Because our mindset and our story suggests that we can't do that. And I think that we can, but it is a worldwide problem because our civilized mythology is a worldwide mythology. And we all believe in it. Yeah.
Are the yields higher when it's regenerative?
They can be. Yeah, a lot of people think that industrial naturally leads to higher yields, but there have been a lot of studies that suggest and show that regenerative agriculture leads to higher yields, especially on land that is extremely desecrated. I mean, in our garden, I plant a cover crop every year, and most of it was wheat this year. There was like 6 other things, but a lot of wheat. And all around our farm are these industrial wheat fields. And the wheat in my garden was taller and greener and thicker and more lush than all of the chemical wheat that surrounded us. And it was as a result of compost and, you know, building that soil ecosystem. And so, yeah, if I was to harvest that amount of wheat that I had in my garden, it would have been much higher than all of that. And that's a hard thing for people to get. It's like, well, I have to spray these chemicals. I have to till land. I have to do these things. You really don't, you know?
But how do you balance the perception, whether it's industrial or not, with scale? We need scale. We have to have enough to feed the world or do whatever. So
Yeah.
more and more and more. This is solving problems on a really small scale. But enough people doing it on a small scale can lead to...
Yeah, well, I think what most farmers should focus on is profit per acre, not bushels per acre. The bushels per acre is sold to them by companies that are making money on more bushels per acre. But the farmers aren't making any more money, right? And we're not feeding the world. Like, our food system is designed to make money. Like, that's it. That's it. Our entire food system is designed to make money, period.
For some people to eat and others not to.
Yeah. It's just, that's the way it's currently functioning. And farmers are desecrating their land and destroying the greatest financial resource that they have in order for other companies to make money, right?
Not because they want to.
Right, yeah.
There's no farmer every farmer, regardless of context, in my opinion and my experience, loves the land. But when you get caught up
Yeah.
in this vortex and you're told, get big or get out, okay, let me borrow some more money. Let me get in debt. Which leads to, I'm sorry to say, suicide. It's a horrible statistic with our farmers who have been told, you gotta keep the land, okay. Only way I can keep the land is get more in debt, okay. That's industrial agriculture. And they've been set up to fail. And those are people those are my heroes, but they were set up to fail.
Sarah makes a really important point. It's, you know, when I say farmers, you could almost assume that like they're the bad guys, and they're not. It's the system that they have, for generations, have been a part of, where they feel trapped by it. I think that if going back to incentivizing farmers to do things differently, I think that they would absolutely be in favor of that if they felt like they could make money doing it. But they just don't know how to make money growing commodity crops in a non-industrial way. And so it's an easy, I mean, if you just think about it, it's an easy transition. It just takes a little bit of organization and a lot of money, which we have, which we spend on other things. We could do it. It would be easy. And I think farmers would jump at it if they wanted.
For something, I
Yeah.
think, I put a little bit of thought into this as well, and I think that the two biggest things that can make the fastest difference for us in the nation is getting rid of crop insurance and getting rid of subsidies. Food's too cheap. And if you get rid of crop insurance, every farmer gets diversified really quickly. You can't afford to lose all of your corn at once. And so crop insurance and then subsidies, there's a lot of incentives to grow really cheap corn to turn into corn syrup to make bullshit food. Corn syrup goes away and corn gets really expensive because nobody wants to grow it. So you solve multiple problems all at once.
Multiple health problems.
Right, and that's without giving money to any farmers to go regenerative. That's just
No,
gonna stop
no.
giving money to the people
What do
who
you
are
think?
not.
You can't just take away subsidies because of the industrial players. Corn is traded on futures markets.
Yep.
It's tied up in a financial system that the farmers don't have control over. The only thing they have control over is how they operate the farm. So until the markets change for their outlets, then we can't just up and take away subsidies because we will have farm suicides.
Yeah.
Yep.
We will have farmers losing their land that's been in their families for generations. We will have families that can't go back to land like we had in the 80s. It's still not today now, but we talked a lot about, in my career, about the farm crisis in the 80s. But we have that now. But the lobbyists that you mentioned, the agriculture lobbyists, have a lot to do with how the subsidies roll. Cargill counts on the fact that those farmers are getting paid those subsidies so they can buy the corn cheap. Like, we have to blow up the whole system and re-establish it, and I see the only way we can do it is what I hear, a lot of what you're saying, Thomas, in terms of working from the bottom up. And starting with us,
Right.
making those different choices so that farmers can make more and more money and stay in business on their smaller acreage as that grows and the markets can change. And they are changing at the industrial level, just slower than we want them to change. So, and we do need crop insurance for those disaster places.
But I think the futures, that's a timing thing, right? The futures are contracts that are written out for delivery in the future. So if you were to say, get rid of crop insurance, then once this cycle, those futures are delivered and the actual yields are delivered to offset those contracts, and they wouldn't have an next contract.
It's more where's the market after that though?
Right.
Like, there has to be a market for them, there has to be some transition for them to switch to another crop.
But if there isn't a future, they want the future to lock in the price of what they're gonna get for growing the corn, right?
Right, but I'm saying that it takes intentional planning
Yeah.
and intentional financial work and for that sale market to be there, for those farmers to be comfortable to even think about making those changes. I'm not against doing away with subsidies, just talking about the reality of what it means.
Transition, kind of transition.
Yeah.
Part of that water, the insurance
Yeah,
and
yeah,
the
yeah.
subsidies, is part of the water.
Yeah. That's really what I was trying to get at. I mean, the way that I think is just 30,000 feet. Don't try to get me to ever implement anything. My son's gotten really into Legos, and it's one by one by one. But wait, this step, this step, this step, and I'm just like, let's just put the thing together. You know, how does this thing work? That's how my brain works. So, yeah, this is water thing. Like, the first step in changing anything from an industrial to a regenerative system is to first just recognize where we are in the mindset and the mythology of our culture, right? And how we got to this point. And it's not to say, well, we shouldn't get rid of subsidies and crop insurance. We should. That's going to have to be a transition, you know, a slow transition. And that transition is only going to happen with consumers spending money differently, and then farmers deciding that they're going to spend money, farm differently. The only way that I would ever have started farming is if I could do this regeneratively. There's no way that I would want to sit on a tractor and be $1.5 million in debt and, you know, spray and harvest and plant and everything on a tractor and then sell it to a commodity market. There's no, why would I choose to live that way, you know? This is the only type of farming that I'm interested in doing, and I think that most young people, that might be interested in farming but maybe don't want to tell their parents that that's what they want to do. That's the only farming that they want to do, you know? And so there has to be an opportunity for them to do that. Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about if we get out of the water into the air,
Mm-hmm.
what does that look like? Like, what does our society look like?
Well, have you ever seen the movie WALL-E? Like, we just watched that with our son. There's a scene, WALL-E is this robot, and he's at the end times in the United States, you know, where these trash is piled high, and all the humans on the Earth have gone into this spaceship, and they're living in space until, you know, they discover plant life on Earth again, and they can come back. And on this spaceship, they all have these screens, you know, that are in front of them, and they're just sitting in these chairs, you know, and they have these big drinks, and, you know. And then at some point, WALL-E, he gets on the spaceship, and he knocks one of these people over, and their screen goes away. And they're like, what is this, you know? Like, I didn't know we had water in here. I didn't know, like, what is, like, that's what it looks like. It's like we're living, and I'm not to say that we're all just addicted to our screens, which we kind of are, but it's like we're living, we think that all of this is completely normal, and then the screen gets knocked away, and you're like, oh, this is not normal, you know? And it's kind of a lonely place to be, you know? Like, that's a lonely place to be. When you decide, when you understand that the way that we're living is a way of living, but it's a story. You know, it's just a story. It's a story that we've been enacting since we decided, for whatever reason, to become civilized and practice a totalitarian system of agriculture. And it works for a lot of us. I would suggest that it works for a lot of us in this room. But it doesn't work for a lot of us.
Are you asking though, like, what it looks like for us to be consuming food that comes from a regenerative system?
Like, the
Yeah,
giant
big vision comes to life.
Yeah, what does that look
goes
like?
away and we're
You're good at understanding what I need to talk about. So, like, what kind of real action could you take when you begin to see that?
What's utopia?
Yeah. Well, it's a tough, just a second. There is no utopia. That's the problem. Like, even if we adopted a regenerative food system and every farmer in the world was growing food this way, we'd still be, I really want to cuss, but I'm not going to cuss. We'd still be screwed up, like, because we're imperfect. We're imperfect. Humans are imperfect. Like, we're destined to be imperfect because we're not perfect. We're not gods. But what it looks like is you buy food from Sarah and Rodney. I mean, what it looks like is that Heritage Butchery doesn't go out of business because you make the choice to spend money there, you know? Like, I don't want to throw my own family under the bus, but I literally grow and raise food. And they buy it at a grocery store because that's where we buy food. That's where everybody buys food. That's where we buy food. You know, this isn't a purity test. I'm not trying to make anyone feel shame. But it's just, that's where we choose to buy food. And for that to change, we have to spend money differently. Not all of our money, but a little bit. You know? That's just a choice that we have. You want to see what you care about, look at your bank account. You know? And so that's what, and then, you know, I've said this before, but once people start spending more money, there's 8 million people in DFW. If they all spent $20 a month on regenerative agriculture, that would send this into the next stratosphere, you know? That's the power, I think.
How could they spend $20 a month in supporting regenerative agriculture?
Do what?
How could they? What could they buy? What could they do for $20?
Well, Jeff grows every vegetable known to man, and he delivers it to your door. I sell beef online that's delivered to your door through Rehoboth Ranch. You can go to any number of farmers markets and have conversations with people that will sell you things. It's just a different way of buying food, you know?
Grow a garden.
Yeah, grow a garden.
I would also add, Thomas, when you go out to a restaurant, ask your server where the food came from. My tagline on my personal email is, where does your food come from? So start perpetuating that question, where does your food come from? Exactly. But the more you ask the question, the more awareness you bring, the more you start to question what's the water that I'm in. And then teach your kids to read food labels.
Yes.
So it's a great science experiment, it's a great language experiment, it's a great pastime for you guys to spend with your families, with your kids, actually looking at something together other than your phones. Those would be my two main things, is read food labels and ask, where does this food come from? When you're in the grocery store and you pick up a box of, I don't know what cereal, Cheerios, look and see, where does this come from? If you're in a restaurant and you see that your, I don't that pork come from? Those are the two.
I think a really important point, and I'm talking too much because I have a microphone, but is that we really have to change our perception of regenerative agriculture and asking where our food comes from this idea that it's this niche little kind of cute thing, that farmers markets are places to go ride ponies and get your face painted. Instead, thinking of it as literally like a survival mechanism for our culture. We have to change the way that we grow food. We have to change the way that we're in relationship with nature. And it provides all these solutions for the problem, so many of the problems that we face. But instead, our culture thinks of it as kind of like, it's kind of cute. Let's go on a farm tour. It's going to be fun, blah, blah, blah. But it, again, tinfoil in my head. But we really need to begin to value this. And there's so much food today. There's such an abundance of food that we devalue it. That's just a basic principle of economics. And the abundance of food is a result of a food system that has essentially been on drugs since the 1940s. A food system that was done, the Dust Bowl, land that had been desecrated. And then we pumped it full of drugs. And to know anyone with any kind of drug addiction or any addiction to anything, there are two options when you are completely dependent on that. You can die or you can quit. That's it. And that is the exact same for agriculture right now and the way that we're using our land. Unless we stop doing things the way that we're doing, we're either going to not be able to grow food or we can quit. Because we're part of nature, Like we're a part of nature.
Are things like hybridization and genetic modifications compatible with regenerative farming?
That's a question that I think a lot of different people would have a lot of different answers on. I'm not really, I try to not be a black and white evangelist of purity. This is the exact way you have to do it because, like I talked about, nature is diverse, people are diverse, landscapes are diverse. So I think that there's a role for some of that, but it's complicated. Like, it's infinitely complicated. But if you feel like planting a hybrid seed or something like that is going to benefit your land in a way for a while, with ultimately having the mindset of a regenerative mindset, then great. I think go for it.
I would say keeping in mind diversity. I remember when we went to the Land Institute in Salina, Kansas, and it was a huge paradigm shift. I mean, it's like, I couldn't understand. I mean, my daddy was a wheat farmer, and he would grow annual wheat, and then we'd plow it up, and we'd plant annual wheat, and we'd harvest it, and we'd plow it up, and da-da-da-da-da. That's what I knew. I think that's what most of us know. So I went to the Land Institute, and what they were and are doing is learning from the prairie, and instead of annual monocrops, perennial polycultures. So a diversity of plants together. So as far as hybrid or GMO seeds, again, not a monocrop. A monocrop which is going to be more susceptible to pests. And so, now you got to put this on it. And then they get immune to it. Well, we got to put a bigger dose on it. So diversity, that's the other thing. The ecological principles of diversity and some of these other things translate so well into social worlds as well. A diverse community is healthier and more resilient. God don't create no monocrops.
I think it's important too that we educate our children, our young children. And but you can do that by going to your local school and saying, I'm a farmer. I'd be happy to come and talk to your kiddos when they're doing the farming, so that they know where bread comes from. If you ask them, they'll say the grocery store. I learned this back when Sarah's dad and I were working in the American Agriculture Movement in Washington. And time and time again, I've seen these kids say, well, everything comes from the grocery store. Take in some wheat. Actually go in and do, depending on the age you're talking to, but they start farming in kindergarten. I was a school teacher, and I'm a farmer. I've been a farmer all my life, but I'm a retired teacher. And it's very important that we educate them young. And you can do that by just volunteering.
Yeah, very true. think we have to remember there's also a debate going on about should we be plant-based or not. It's kind of the niche that I've fallen into following this Netflix documentary that I was in. And so many people think that the solution to our life is to just eat plants. Or there's also so many on the other side that say, no, there's, a carnivorous life is the only way to live. And the truth is that it's not what we eat, it's how that food is grown or raised that really matters. Lewis and Clark were not delayed for days on end by confined animal feeding operations. They were delayed by miles and miles of grazing animals across the Great Plains. Grazing animals that over thousands of years built layers of topsoil that then farmers across the Great Plains exploited to grow crops. It was because of grazing animals. But, we shouldn't be confining these animals in these huge spaces that leads to all this environmental degradation at the same time. Likewise, we shouldn't be growing monocultures that are completely chemically dependent, putting them in grocery stores and thinking that we're solving a problem by eating this food that's grown on this desecrated land that completely destroyed an ecosystem. It's how, not what. And so if you want to be vegan, be vegan. If you want to just eat meat, just eat meat. But your goal, I think, should be to focus on how that food is grown or raised. And how healthy that ecosystem and how diverse that ecosystem is where you're getting your food. So, yeah. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you all.